we're going to begin with, again, maybe it isn't surprising for the aforementioned Birth of a Nation, but with our longest film, which is the 2.5-hour Metropolis, apparently originally shown as more than 3.5 hours in its first screening. Fritz Lang was maybe a bit self-indulgent, but very, very famous Metropolis and influential Metropolis, Scott.
Yes, the mediator between the head and the hands must be the heart, says Fritz Lang's Metropolis. So if we learn nothing else from this film, it's simply do not let Fritz Lang set up any arbitration tribunals. His 1927 film is now commonly held up as a masterpiece of the silent age, although was rather less warmly received on its initial release. And I suppose we should recognise, before getting too far into deciding which viewpoint is correct, we're not judging the complete work, at least as Lang intended, the film being cut substantially after the initial premiere, with parts of that still lost to time, even with the valiant modern restoration processes from the odd long-buried reel that show up from time to time. Anyway, looking at what's available to us, we're introduced to Gustav Froelich as Freder, the indeterminately aged but young son of Alfred Abel's John Fredersen, the apparent creator and ruler of a vast metropolis boom tidal rob. Here, the wealthy live in carefree luxury, with the 0.1%, such as Freder, living in an apparently entirely insulated, closeted life in the Eden-esque pleasure gardens, while hordes of nameless workers toil and die at the underground edifice of the pitiless machines that run the place. Pitiless and puzzling in function and design, it must be said, but I suppose that's the expressionism speaking. He's shaken back to reality by the sudden intrusion into paradise by a bunch of child poors, shepherded by Bridget Helm's Maria, a saintly figure we'll later find to be held as a prophet of sorts by the oppressed working classes. They're quickly banished back to the underdepths alongside the rest of their kind, but not before Freder has fallen in love with her, and perhaps also her message that they're all brothers, even the girls. Maybe that's also the expression I'm speaking, I don't know. Freder resolves to ask his father about what the deal is with all this mass oppression and all, and before long is heading off there himself to find Maria and fully see the horrors of the underground underclass. Shadowed by his father's spy, Fritz rasps the thin man, and seeing that things could soon be coming off the rails, Papa Fredersen enlists the help of his long-term frenemy and inventor, Rudolf Kleinrock, as Rotwang. He has been working on a secret project, the iconic man machine of images no doubt you'll have seen from this film, and as the intertitles would have it, it's the man machine, although I see Rotwang's giving him tits. Expressionism, probably. Anyway, this machine can take the form of anyone, so Fredersen wants to create a robotic doppelganger of Maria with the intent of ruining her reputation and dampening down talk of a working-class revolution. But it turns out Rotwang is holding on to more of a grudge than he lets on, and seeks instead to tear it all down and watch the world burn. Young Freder therefore finds himself slap bang in the middle of these machinations and must find a way to save Maria and the city from destruction. Now, there's been a lot of analysis done over the years on Metropolis, and if you are the sort of person who gets off on that sort of thing, more power to you. Myself, I think I'm on Team H.G. Wells, who I'm led to believe knew a thing or two about science fiction, in thinking that this is silly. Perhaps the crucial moments of meaning are those that have been lost, but I cannot find a particularly coherent message in Metropolis that's evident in the text in front of me. For example, I'm surprised to see here that it was criticised for having a communist message, and let me just run this through my Marxalizer. Results coming in now. It just says, "This ain't it, Chief." Likewise, in common with a few of these films, actually, there's a feint at a more religious message in there, except it doesn't really say anything much about it, other than that religion exists in this context, which kind of seems like a preemptive attempt to avoid being cancelled by zealots, Copernicus style, rather than having a point as such. Although cancelled by zealots is a good name for an indie album. So, to cut my withering short, I am not on board with this as a masterpiece of messaging, but there's more than enough to appreciate in other aspects of the film. In particular, the imagination and execution of the world building and the visuals is really rather impressive now, let alone for the time, and is more than worth the price of admission by itself. The performances, well, there's always a fair amount of playing to the back seats with this era, so I'll go along with it, even when it's unarguably gone into way too silly territory. Evil Maria and the dance club seduction scene, I am looking directly at you. At least, unlike some other landmark films we've covered that make me feel like I'm on crazy pills because they're obviously awful, there's at least a lot in here that I can see why people would latch onto and want to talk about, even if I disagree that the messaging or the metaphors are clear enough to support it. And that's alongside stuff that I did appreciate. So I'm glad I've watched it, and I certainly recommend anyone with a passing interest in the history of cinema, not just science fiction, should watch it. But I will probably never come back to this. And maybe that's the most expressionist thing of them all. It's not, that doesn't make any sense. I just didn't have a good way to wrap up this review. And I still don't. Drew.
Yes, curious that you mentioned that people have thought it had a communist message, given that it was meant to have inspired in some way Nazi Germany, and Adolf Hitler applauded the world it displayed. So I think sometimes people just bring in what they want to see to these things when they say things like that. Yeah, it's... To be honest, the reason for doing this episode at all was for a reason to watch Metropolis. It's one of those films I'd been aware of for a very long time. It's been referenced in one way or another in so many things. Even like the Radio Gaga music video by Queen, it's everywhere. And I've seen so many bits and pieces of it. I'd never actually sat down and watched the film, which I have now, and I'm very glad I did. Just on a side note, though, this I watched. I don't know if you watched the same version, Scott. There are multiple. I watched the most recent Blu-ray, I believe, which is with as much restored as it's been able to be for a while. After they found the 16mm print in Argentina.
Yeah, I believe that's what I watched. Yeah, and
it's interesting that a long thought to be missing German thing should turn up in Argentina. Funny that. I think, like you, I struggle to see any particular message or meaning in it. I mean, I could take a stab at a few, but I don't know if I'm just trying really hard to find one.
Yeah, like there's a lot of things I could graft onto this, but I'd be doing an awful lot of the legwork myself rather than just looking at what's in the text, which is what I was trying to get at there. Let's say, if you want to use this as a basis for any number of things, more power to your elbow, the general you, not you in particular. But yeah, I just don't think it's actually supported by the text in this instance.
No, I don't. And I think the thing is basically an expressionist masterpiece. Like, it's not really kind of about morality or other themes like that. If it's an expressionist thing to begin with, that's all pretty nebulous as a starting point.
Yeah.
However, I am now glad that I've seen it. I had reservations for much the same reason that you suggested, Scott. It's like, I've seen a lot of things that other people consider masterpieces, and I've thought they're quite genuinely awful.
Yeah.
So there was always that slight concern going into this. But I thought I was captivated by it because part of it is I'm looking for meanings and trying to understand what they meant by any given thing. But whether I would get a great deal out of a second viewing or not, I'm not sure. But this first one, even with its relatively long runtime, and that's a lot of time without dialogue to watch a film, I was not bored for even a second because there was so much to take in. I was appreciating the incredible set design and then like the weird thing that like a couple of the major characters have decided to be sensible and realise that in a visual medium people can read your face and know what you're doing. In particular, Joe Fredersen and Josephat are for the most part acting like normal people would act.
Yes.
And then Freder and Rotvang in particular are...
Yes.
Oh dear. Yes, they are very yes. Maybe the sets are so large because they were chewing so much of it, they had to have sufficient left to film with. But,
certain attrition rate of it, yeah.
So you kind of can't take your eyes off of that stuff, though, and it's fascinating. And on that same tack, it's weird, the woman who played Maria, 1920s German Evan Rachel Wood.
Yes.
Like when she's Maria, she's actually kind of closer to Rotvang and Freder, Joe Fredersen rather, in like not overacting. When she's Hell,
yes,
the robot, she's given as good as she gets against Rotvang and Freder for chewing the scenery.
Oh yes.
But yeah, it's just fascinating. It's so interesting. As I said, there's not a moment of I was bored by because I'm taking in the sets and like the costumes and listening to the really interesting music and wondering why bits of it are playing because even the soundtrack's really interesting. The restored version I watched was there meant to be the original soundtrack, I believe, in it. And there's lots of bits like sections of the 1812 Overture by Tchaikovsky playing, and I'm watching thinking, okay, that's not accidental, not just because they like the sound of it. What are they trying to say with that? And while I'm not sure there are that many themes in it, beyond the really obvious stuff like Moloch, which is about it's like an ancient god or practice of child sacrifice and stuff. That's a bit kind of more on the nose. Mm-hmm. But my mind's working constantly. And that's like right, what are they trying to say by this? Maybe there isn't anything at the end, but I was thinking about it. I was wondering what they were going for, what statements were being made. So my mind was active through all of it. So I wasn't bored for a second. It's just a really, really interesting film. And also the restoration is beautiful. The bits that aren't the damaged 16mm print from Argentina, that's just kind of filling in blanks.
Yeah.
Really, really nice transfer. It's so clear. And I don't believe that projection ability was so poor in the 1920s that you would have needed these people overacting so much. So, why they were doing it with other people in the same film were like, no, we'll just have like normal faces like people do. I just found it a really fascinating film. There's so much going on there. You mentioned the communist thing, and I did think actually that there's a couple of points in there I thought maybe they're making comments with the 1812 Overture, which is written for the defeat of Napoleon's forces in the Russian Empire, like 100 years before the Communist Revolution and stuff. Like, there's maybe something there, and like the name of the foreman being of the one of the workers being Georgi, which is like doesn't. I think that was a German version of that. I thought that was like Georg or Jorg, so it felt Slavic. But again, maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I was having a lot of fun doing it. I've entirely lost my train of thought now. I had more cohesive thoughts. It's definitely something I would recommend seeing. It's really interesting. You can see why it's in many ways so influential. It's very ambitious in its scale.
Yeah, and definitely auteur-led in a way that you don't see these days. I mean, you'll never see a Marvel equivalent of this film. Nothing so as individual or so driven by that kind of vision. And the way this looks is just so different from everything I've seen, at least in the era of science fiction. It is certainly worth watching for sure.
Yes, I would counsel you perhaps not to read anything about the production of it though, because I don't think Fritz Lang was a particularly nice person.
No.
Given he had, 500 incredibly poor children working in like knee-deep freezing cold water for 2 weeks and stuff. And, I have the suspicion that he may be one of those rather arrogant people that thinks it's suffering is worth it for his art, especially if it's other people suffering. Yes.
Who could have predicted that a German of this era would be so evil?
Yes, but yeah, very much something to look into. A very interesting film, and I'm pleased it's one of those classics that hasn't disappointed me.
Indeed.